To say that version 4 has completely changed Genshin Impact would be an understatement. Not even halfway through and it already feels like every new character has the potential to give our existing teams a run for their money. It's been over a year since my last video on the 5 best teams in the game, so I think it's appropriate to make a new one. For today, we'll be renewing my video from last year updated for 2024's current meta and roster, taking into account all the newcomers and weighing them against the best teams of the previous generation. Given that there are far too many teams to measure, I plan to include 2 honorable mentions as well, so technically I guess you can call this a top 7 video, but nonetheless, a few things I want to get out of the way. First being the criteria for how I judge a team's validity. Depending on who you ask, some will place emphasis on a number of factors more than others. For example, one person might favor sustainability or accessibility more, while another will value the absolute peak of what a team is capable of, disregarding the cost it takes to reach that point. Moreover, some may find a team very strong thanks to their general coverage both in overworld and domains, while another grades the strength of a team purely on the basis of their speedrun times in Spiral Abyss. I'm gonna try to keep things as general as possible. That is to say, this list is not ordered whatsoever, and I plan to make each choice as holistic as possible for the reason that I want everyone to prioritize playing who they feel most comfortable with. So if hypothetically you have a team with A, B, C, and D, but instead of C you want to include X, the team should still function well enough to perform regardless of whether you field C or X, provided they're the same element and have similar functions. Finally, I'm fully aware that an argument can be made for dozens of teams to be considered the best, and so I'd like to make this emphatically clear. Just because I do not include a team on this list does not mean they're bad or not worth using. Genshin Impact is not a zero-sum meta. Saying that X character is good doesn't make Y character bad. It would simply be too cumbersome to ascertain every possible what-if scenario and edge case, so take this video as a reference point on what to look out for, not as a black and white doctrine on who is good and who is bad. That being said, if you believe there are teams worth mentioning that I do not in this video, you're welcome to leave them in the comments down below. Without further ado, let's begin. Starting with the honorable mentions, the first one will be Childe International. Over the years, this team has made itself known for effectively being the silver bullet of Genshin. As an all-purpose team composition that excels in both single target and wave clearing situations alike, Childe was always a powerful unit, but it took a while for the general player base to grow wise to his actual potential. Conventional iterations of the international team entail himself alongside Bennett and Xiangling and then Kazuha. The gist of this team is to power up Childe and Xiangling as much as possible, who then power each other up through vaporized reactions. Though Childe ultimately serves as a driver for Xiangling, his own personal damage is quite good and should be acknowledged accordingly. International's value stems not from having the best ceiling or even being the most efficient. In fact, some may argue the relatively higher chance of messing up on this team makes it less valuable than a more consistent one, to which I somewhat agree, which is why I placed him as honorable mention. But the benefit of International is that it's always a good option. There pretty much hasn't been a single Spiral Abyss iteration in the past year where Childe International wasn't a good option for one of your two teams, and there likely never will be. You have a solid coverage of Hydro and Pyro damage along with extremely high base power on 2 characters with respectable area coverage and single target DPS. Realistically, the only weakness of International is that your hope for survival falls on Bennett, who may not be sufficient enough for more survival-oriented floors. Either way, you can't go wrong with them. Second honorable mention will be Animal Hypercarry, definitely a team I did not give enough credit in the past, but they're now slowly creeping up in the eyes of many. Animo is not known for being a carry element. Historically, its units have only ever been viewed as supportive in nature. Venti, Kazuha, Sucrose, Jean, what have you. But there are 2 units in particular that diverge from this narrative, Wander and Shao, who both represent the Animal Hypercarry team. As the name implies, the goal of this team is to kill everything with Shao or Wander. Both units make use of Bennett and Vars, with the latter being the linchpin of this team. Though she's technically functional at base, the real strength of this team is derived from her Constellation 6. With this in play, Farzan and Bennett can elevate Shao and Wander's DPS to extreme heights, being able to compete with some of the game's best. The benefit of Animal Hypercarry is that like Childe International, it's good for single target damage and wave clear. Wander has a bit more easy of a time in AoE, but Shao can reasonably handle small clusters of mobs too. The attack boost from Bennett pairs nicely with them, and neither of them really need elemental mastery. You basically build them like you would any other hypercarry. As for the 4th slot, defensive utility is usually the way to go. Zhongli for Shao or Toma for Wander. However, if you really want to go balls to the wall, you can run Farina, since Shao can dodge attacks at time correctly by straight up jumping over everything, and Wander can move around while attacking so he can kite enemies. The main thing gatekeeping this team is that unlike other 4 stars where constellations are nice, it's kind of obligatory for Farzan to be max constellation in light of her literally being the heartbeat of this team. And as you know, trying to get C6 on a specific 4-star can either be really cheap or more expensive than C2 or C3ing a 5-star, which is why I feel like it's best kept as honorable mention. On to our top 5 teams. As a reminder, this is not ordered. The first team I want to cover features one of the newest and arguably one of the strongest 5-stars in the game, Neuvillette. This guy was so ridiculously overpowered that in his debut season, one of the best teams for 36-starring Spiral Abyss was, and I'm not even kidding, just him. No team, solo Nuve for the entire Abyss. That gives you an idea just how powerful this man is. On screen it says Neuvillette, but I suppose the more appropriate team is Neuvillette Hypercarry. Depending on if you have C1 or not, the requirements for what is sufficient on him can differ. But for the most part, the team that I personally think is the best all-covering would be him, Fischl, Jean, and Furina. If you have C2 Furina, then you can potentially swap out Jean for Kazuha for even more damage. This allows you to acquire 2 reactions for heir to the Ancient's authority, and though you do miss out on the last 35% boost, Furina's 75% damage boost at C0 can make up the difference and then some. Of course, if you have C1 Nuve, then you get the best of both worlds. Though I said this list is not ordered, Neuvillette may potentially be the best team in the game if we go by just how all-purpose it can be. His single target damage is incredible, his area coverage is incredible, his uptime is incredible, his consistency is incredible. This guy does everything. Equitable Judgment does exquisite damage both against one enemy or several thanks to being able to move and spin around while you use it, having sufficient range to basically cover the entire chamber of Spiral Abyss if you stand in the center of it. Furthermore, he consumes no stamina during this attack and can fire 3 rounds of it when using his skill and burst combined, which gives him above average uptime. Team-wise, the only thing you really need to do for him is get 2 or 3 Hydro-based reactions off. Hypothetically, if you don't have Furina, you can run Zhongli for Crystallize, or you can field a Cryo unit for Freeze. It honestly doesn't matter who you play alongside him. His own damage is so good that it carries the entire team. Like Mono Hydro though, he obviously is not a good choice against Hydro immune enemies, but outside of that, this guy is one of the easiest characters to play and use. All that's needed are Hydro-based reactions. Bloom, Electrocharge, Swirl, what have you, and you're good to go. Next team on this list will be Double Hydro. Double Hydro has quickly turned into one of the most widely used teams in the game by virtue of its simplicity and effectiveness. The first iteration of Double Hydro was Xingqiu, Yelan, and usually some kind of defensive support like Zhongli, with the most classic example being Hu Tao and those 3. But in all honesty, you can basically run anyone up front and just rely on the sheer damage output of the Hydro off-fielders. Now, with the inclusion of Furina, there are different variants you can go for. The one I have in mind specifically is the newest version of Hu Tao Double Hydro, featuring herself, Yelan, Furina, and Jean. This by extension is what a few of my friends have coined the Flex State team. Yelan and Furina might be one of the strongest off-field DPS pairs in the entire game, both capable of outputting staggering amounts of Hydro damage and subsequently application while simultaneously buffing the party, specifically the main damage dealer on a skill hitherto never been seen before. All that remains is a healer to synergize with Furina, which can be Jean, Kokomi, Yao Yao, Charlotte, or Baiju, whichever you prefer, and then your main damage dealer, who for most people is Hu Tao. But just like before, only better, you can frankly run any damage dealer and brute force your way through anything. To give you an example just how strong Furina and Yelan buff the main carry, they give so much damage that you can straight up disregard Staff of Homa and Hu Tao's own low health bonus because those 2 give so much more than that. Plus, if you run Jean, you get access to Vivi Shred for any Electro, Cryo, Pyro, or Hydro attacker. Just to repeat though, Double Hydro comes down to which one you prefer from situation to situation. If Xingqiu's defensive utility is more important than Yelan's extra damage, then you can go Xingqiu or Furina. If you don't like Furina's HP drain, then Xingqiu and Yelan are still very good. Likewise, your healer can be swapped around based on what you're looking for, and as for main damage, the Hu Tao is the easiest and most efficient on-fielder. You can pretty much use anyone. That's why it's called Flex State. Furina, Yelan, and a healer can basically make any on-field damage dealer broken. This team can definitely struggle against burst-oriented teams though, as while the healer is there to offset Furina's HP drain, more often than not you'll be fighting at half your maximum health, which leaves you more vulnerable to getting one-shotted compared to the more traditional Double Hydro team of Zhongli, Xingqiu, and Yelan. But the damage is just so good that you can tear through any dungeon or boss before they have a chance to strike back. It is easily one of the best and most straightforward teams in the game to this day. Next team, or rather I should say teams as it's more of an umbrella term, is Dendro. Though version 4 is gradually taking us away from version 2 and 3's reaction meta, Dendro is still the benchmark of Genshin Impact by which all other teams are measured against. Any variant of Dendro, Hyper Bloom, Quicken, Quick Bloom and such fit into this category, with the one exception being Nilo Bloom, who I'll cover in a moment. Unlike the previous 2 who focus more on a specific combination of units, Dendro teams draw their value from accessibility. The best frontrunners of Dendro are without a doubt Nahida, Alhaitham, and Baishu, but generally, so long as you can pull off any of its reactions, you're good to go. To underscore just how powerful Dendro's damage floor is, a full team of 4 stars can outdamage many 5-star teams. For example, you can run Fischl, Shinobu, Xingqiu, and DMC, and clear through basically everything in the game. Going into more specifics though, Alhaitham and Nahida serve as the linchpins of any Dendro team you can think of, with Baishu being a worthwhile alternative in tandem with Furina. Quicken and Hyper Bloom are both strong in their own ways, so you can basically run anything, or usually what people do is run Quick Bloom, which is both of them at the same time. You simply need a ton of Dendro application, a ton of Electro application, and if you go Hyper Bloom, a ton of Hydro application. Spam as much of that together as possible and you basically win. Dendro was fortunate enough to have a very efficient roster that delivers well on its needs, while coincidentally synergizing with two elements also with efficient rosters, Hydro and Electro. That's the thing with Dendro, pretty much anything works. From Electro, you have Shinobu, Fischl, Beidou, Miko, Shogun, Sino, and Koting, who can also play Electro in various ways to be good at Hyper Bloom and or Aggravate. From Hydro, you have Xingqiu, Yelan, Furina, Kokomi, Ayato, and even Neuvillette to help you out with Bloom teams, while in Dendro you have DMC, Tignati, Yao Yao, Baizu, Alhaitham, and Nahida. Just pick and choose from these pools and you have yourself at worst a competitively strong team, a testament to how much Dendro carries in this game, when literally anything works, so long as it's achieving Quicken and or Bloom. Team number 4 will be Nilou. I know she's technically a Dendro team also, but given how unique she is and that it revolves around a character-specific mechanic, I think it's worth mentioning as a standalone category. Nilou Bloom follows the same basic principle as Standard Bloom, only instead of increasing the damage with Electro, she increases the damage of each Bloom core by herself. Setting your entire team as any combination of Hydro and Dendro with at least one each will empower any Dendro core that spawns from Bloom to explode much faster and have a larger AoE while dealing significantly more damage. How much more damage? For every 1000 points of max HP that Nilou has, over 30k will increase the damage of her bountiful cores by 9% up to a cap of 400%. So she basically lets you acquire similar to more damage as a Hyper Bloom core without needing an Electro unit, and more importantly, the increased effect radius of her bountiful cores gives her impressive area coverage, compensating for your inability to field animal units like Venti or Kasuha, and more area coverage means more Dendro cores can hit more enemies versus Hyper Bloom, which has much less AoE. Nilou is a very restrictive unit. You can only use Hydro and Dendro units, which to many is a big turnoff. Merely having an Electro, Animo, or any unit not of those two elements prevents her from functioning, but in most if not all cases, the payoff is more than worth the austere conditions. Dendro's reactions alone are exceptionally powerful, and Nilou amplifies Bloom that much more. She has plenty of options for Dendro and Hydro application that once again, it doesn't really matter who you bring as long as they can apply either or. The only real stipulation for Nilou's team is that you want to have someone who can heal you and fast, as bountiful cores can damage the active character when they explode too. By considering the abundance of healers from either element, Kokomi, Barbara, Yao Yao, and Baizu, that's hardly what I would call a problem. In totality, while one would consider Nilou Bloom to be a niche team, it is so powerful that through sheer force, it transcends being a niche and becomes an all-purpose team that works on pretty much anything. Nilou is an example of a gimmicky character that was designed to where that gimmick does not impede practicality. Final team I want to talk about is another newcomer, Linny. Some of you may be surprised to see this after I said in my first impressions video that Linny is on par with Yoimiya, but let's just say I was vastly underestimating him. Hey, in my defense, it was my first impressions. Anyways, Linny is actually one of the best single target damage dealers in the game, which is impressive given the way he does it. As you know, Linny's party trick revolves around Mono Pyro, with the typical team entailing himself, Xiangling and Bennett of course, and then a flex, usually Kasuha or Furina. Courtesy of one of his passive talents, he can deal almost double damage to enemies affected by Pyro if there are 3 Pyro characters on his team, including himself, hence why you include Bennett and Xiangling. The reason Linny's damage is so high though stems from how many ways it can be amplified both from within and without. Next to dealing double damage against Pyro-affected enemies, he can also increase the damage of his elemental skill based on the number of prop surplus stacks, which can turn it into a humongous screen nuke. Then, each of his level 2 aim shot attacks have very high base damage too, especially thanks to his other passive talent. No other way to put it. Linny's base damage is immaculate, which he can then almost double, not to mention his team can boost his damage even further. For all intents and purposes, Linny is a hyper carry. Kasuha or Furina can boost his damage through their own various ways, with the former increasing elemental damage and VV shredding Pyro, and the latter giving total damage while vaporizing a few hits. Since you have 3 Pyro units, they can maintain the Pyro status without Furina overriding it with Hydro. As mentioned before though, it's important to note that this team is not known for its AoE coverage. Unless you regard Xiangling's Pyronado as wave clear, Linny Mono Pyro is primarily for single target damage. Fortunately, however, it is one of the easier teams to gear up since for most people, the only new character you have to work on is him. Everyone has Bennett, everyone has Xiangling, and anyone who's been playing for a while most likely has Kasuha and or Furina because those are 2 of the best units in the game. So despite being a very specific team like Nilou, the payoff once again is well worth the investment. Linny essentially has all of the quality of life features that Yoimiya wishes she had. Alrighty, that concludes my updated list of Genshin's best teams. To repeat one last time, just because a team is not on this list doesn't mean they're bad or not worth using anymore. Raiden National, Freeze, Taser, Soup, those teams are still more than capable of handling the game's toughest content. Be that as it may though, there are a lot of new teams to be on the lookout for, so because of opportunity cost, I find these teams to be ever so slightly stronger. I hope this was insightful to those who needed it and entertaining to those who wanted it. If you enjoyed the video, it would be awesome if you could leave a like and subscribe. Don't forget to follow me on Twitter @Vars, join my Discord server, and check out my updated Best Element video if you haven't yet. But till next time, thanks so much for watching, and I look forward to seeing you again soon. Take care.